In this tutorial, we are going to model this product bottle type of shape, which you can see right here. Okay, so this is what we're going to work on in this first tutorial, which contains sort of a squarish component at the top that transitions to a round component at the bottom. Let's turn that off, take a look at the profiles that we have, which are just some basic Bezier curve profiles that I have set up to guide us along with the process. The cursor is down at the world origin. Let me create a new collection here and we'll call this product, something clever like that. Okay, Shift A, we're going to add a plane. It's going to be enormous, so let's do this 2 inches. I'm going to press G and then Z, and we're going to move that to the top. In fact, I'll come into the front view, G, Z, right to the top. It's a little bit too large, so S key, scale that right till we get about there. Command A, apply the scale, so it's 1.0. Tab key, and we need to add some cross sections to it because we are going to be making it slightly roundish across the faces. It's not going to be perfectly flat. So I'm going to add a few more cross sections. Now I've changed the color of the interactive wireframe to this slight greenish, which actually helps it to become a little bit more visible. Okay, and then we're going to add one more set right like that. So we're going to come over into vertex mode. Let's look at this in the top view. And what we want to do is give it that slight curvature across the face. And I'm first going to grab the centers, S, I'm going to scale those out slightly. And then I'm going to take these corners, S, and I'm going to pull those in slightly. And then the actual corners, S, and we're going to pull those in so they look about like that. So there we go. We just have that bit of rounding. If it's too much, then you can definitely come in like I'm doing here and maybe scaling those in. Yeah, that looks good. That looks about good. Now, the next thing is to take the actual corners themselves and we're going to bevel those. If we come in and apply a subdivision surface modifier, then in fact, let me take this to a value of 2. We can see that it produces the rounding, but it's a little bit too rounded here. So I'm actually going to have us come over. I actually think that I want to add a little bit more control right here. We're going to come up to, in vertex mode, we're going to come to the bevel vertices function. And I'm going to pull that out. And I think I want even a little bit more control than that. So we're going to change that to segments of 2. And I'm going to change it initially to a shape of 1, which gives that perfectly sharp bevel. But I actually want even a little bit more contour right there. So I'm going to back this down to 0.8. And there, do you see how that brought that in? And that produces a better rounding. Yeah, that works. So now in each of the 4 segments, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times 4 is 32. So that's what we want to remember. So the next thing that we want to do is take note where a 3D cursor is. It's right down there at the world origin. And I'm still in polygon edit mode. I'm going to press Shift A because we're going to insert a circle at that location. It's going to be enormous. So let's make this 2 inches. And we have the correct number of segments. So remember, we have 8 along here times 4 is 32. So that's what we want. But this is too large. And what I really want to do is look at this in context of the profile. So I'm going to move this up to the sort of thickest part. And then I'm going to press the S key to scale that down till it's about right that size. So now that we've gotten that selected, what I want to do is select the perimeter around this area up here, but we need to do it in edge mode. So I'm going to hold the Shift key, and you can see that when I double click, it stops at this corner point because it's an n-gon. And there's an easy way that we can select this. If we just go to Select and then down by Trait, if you go to Non-Manifold, it'll select those open edges. And it'll also select these because these are non-manifold, meaning they don't have a fill on one side of the edge, effectively. Okay, so now what we do is we come up to edge and we're going to do bridge edge loops, and there we go. Option Z takes us out of X-ray. Okay, let's turn off subdivision surface. Come into the front, double click this edge perimeter there, and then press the E key and then Z. And we're going to pull this down there. Now I'm going to go back into X-ray so I can kind of see. I want to be able to visualize this guiding curve that we have a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come up here in the outliner and select that by just directly selecting it. As an object, it'll become selected, and that's easier to see with the orange. So I'm going to pull this down till right about there. Do you see the curve comes down and then it kind of angles like that? Do E one more time, Z, and just stop about right there. Press Shift and S and do selection to cursor, but keep the offset. What that means is that it'll keep each of the independent vertices moved relative. So let me just undo and show you what would happen if you did Shift S and did selection to cursor. It would have collapsed each vertex of the selection to that point, and that's not what we want. So selection to cursor, keep offset, there we go. Okay, I'm going to hold the Shift key and select that. And what we want to do is we want to scale this down until it gets closer to the profile. Now, if I just press the S key and scale it, it's going to scale it uniformly, and I don't want to scale it uniformly. So what I need to do is press S again, but then look at all the little controls at the bottom, and we only want it to scale around the Z axis. You're going to tap Shift and Z, and then it'll scale uniformly, but only around the Z axis. There you go. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do is start doing some forming work, because we clearly don't have enough points in here to conform the mesh to the profile. So the next thing that I want to do is add some loop cuts to start giving us more geometry to work with. So we're going to come over, let's do 3 cuts right there. And then at the top, we're going to add a few more here. And let's turn off subdivision surface. We don't need that. Okay, so let's come in and do some forming work. I'm going to double click. I'm in edge mode. I'm going to double click these 3. And again, if I press the S key, it's going to scale down to their center point. And if you press the period key, right now we're going to bounding box selection, which is perfect for editing elements. But S key again, I want them to scale radially around the Z axis. So I'm going to tap Shift and Z, and now you can see it scales only radially. Okay, S key. There we go. Let's come down to the bottom. I'm going to add a cut here, and I'm going to drag it down like that. That works. And then one more right there. Okay, let's come back to the top. We'll do these S, Shift and Z. There we go. And then S, I'm going to pull this one in slightly. Okay, and so these curves up here are pretty subtle. There we go. Now, at this point, we can come in and do some refining work. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one and I'm going to come down to the slide function and I'm going to slide that up just to sort of transition the density of them a little bit more. Let's come up to the top. Let's turn subdivision back on. We can see that up here, how that is rounding. We don't want that to happen. We're going to deal with that. In fact, let's come up here and deal with that right now. Let's turn off subdivision. And I'm going to have a select Option Z to go out of X-ray. Now, do you see how it's going to be a pain to do that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and do a select by sharp edges. And maybe too much, so let's do this. Let's come up to 50 degrees, and that means we're only going to get these larger angles, and that just makes that quite easy. In fact, I always just examine just to make sure the bottom is open, so we don't need to worry about down there. Okay, let's zoom in. We're going to come over to the bevel tool, and now let's take this to 2 with a shape of 1. What this is going to do, in fact, I'm going to switch over here to Active Tool so that I can grab any of the edges. And this is going to put in an initial set of boundary edges. Each of these edges are just slid along the existing edges, so they will function very well as bounding polygons to a rounding that we're going to add. So now I'm going to double click this again. In this case, we're going to do 3, but we want to return the shape to 0.5, which is a nice rounded contour. Okay, there we go. Perfect. Now we can come back in and turn subdivision surfaces back on. And if we take a look at this edge right here is corresponding to this subdivided edge. If we turn off optimal display, you can see the actual polygons. And I want to change this just a little bit. So for this edge, I'm going to do an edge, and we're going to do an edge crease. And I'm going to start mousing left to right. And I'm going to change the crease to bring up that subdivided edge a little bit closer to that. Okay. Now, let's come down to the bottom and work from the bottom up. In fact, let's change the resolution of subdivision to 2, and we can look and see how close it is to the contour of the profile that we're using for the actual modeling process. So I'm going to double click this edge, press the S key, and scale it. Now, if we look very closely, it's this edge, this perimeter subdivided edge, that I'd like to get matched up a little bit more closely. S key, S key, S. There we go. So I'm being kind of careful and fastidious. We can just sort of, that looks pretty close. S key. There we go, S. That's pretty close. And we get all the way here, S. Okay, there we go. Okay, that's good enough. That's good enough. Okay, so if we take that out, let's turn back on optimal display. We can check out the shading, and I think that works. I think that works pretty well. In fact, I'm going to come over and turn Shade Auto Smooth on. There we go. Okay, so that is how I would go about modeling this shape. Now on the bottom, let's add in just a little bit of geometry for rounding for the bottom. So go into edit mode, double click the bottom, press the F key, which is the same as doing new face from edges. There we go. We need to add some geometry in. Let's turn off subdivision surfaces. We're going to come over and we're going to do an inset. We're an active tool, so we can just grab anywhere in the selection. There we go. I'm going to do one time and then another. And then I'm going to press the X key and we're going to delete that large face on the bottom. So now when we turn subdivision back on, we get a nice rounding on the bottom. Okay, there we go. So that's the body of our shampoo bottle.